where they staged the National Armed Forces Day. So we laid out some judo mats and we put on a hand-to-hand combat demonstration. And this plane flew over right after our demonstration at about 7,000 feet, and we didn't realize that they were going to jump. And next thing we knew, we saw this. They both had smoke bombs attached to their feet, and we saw this red smoke flailing behind these two guys that had just jumped out of this plane.
That was what year?
59.
Oh, wow.
I said, God damn, that really looks cool. I gotta find out about that. So when I got back to Bragg, I started asking around. And they said, well, there's guys over in the old hospital area, Smoke Bomb Hill there, down from Smoke Bomb Hill, and they've got some skydiving clubs there. So
that was at Bragg?
Bragg, yeah.
Bragg.
So one of the clubs was the Special Warfare Center Club, which is Special Forces came under
Right.
that, Green Beret. So I went in and met a couple of guys, and they were pretty cool. And so they said, come on out, and we'll give you some instruction, and you can jump. So as soon as because I was full-time medic for SF team, so I spent a lot of time in the field. As soon as I was able to get loose, I went over and went out to Sicily drop zone. I can tell you exactly when it was from my logbook. And they gave me, maybe 30 minutes of refresher training on how to make a PLF and how to bend your back and get your stomach and center of gravity down so you don't roll over and you're facing the earth. And then they hooked me up to a static line and took me up.
How high did you go?
I think 2,000 feet. Hadn't changed much. Probably still 2,200. 2,200, I think it was. And you had to make 5 jumps, static line jumps, and you had to pull a dummy ripcord on 3 of them. So they're sitting and watching you in the airplane. The jump master puts you out. You count to 5, pull the ripcord. If you forget, that jump doesn't count.
Oh, yeah, do it all over again. Huh?
Yeah, you don't have presence of mind, to pull the ripcord. But I didn't have that problem, so on my 3rd jump to qualify, are you recording this?
Yeah.
On my 3rd jump to qualify, I should be up and everything's copacetic and fine. I get in the plane, and I'm the first guy out of the plane. There's 2 other jumpers and a jump master. It's an L-20 Beaver.
Okay.
So it's my turn to go as soon as we make our jump run. They say, get ready. And I think I mentioned this to you earlier. We were still in the infancy of the sport, and we hadn't shortened up our static line. So the static line we were using was a regular T10 static line, which I recall being around 16 feet, but it's much too long for a static line. Normal static line would be about 8 now in skydiving.
Okay.
But none of us knew better. So I got out on the strut to push off, and the jump master let the static line flail behind me. So when they gave me a go and I pushed off, it went under my backpack and it bound. So I fell maybe 10 feet, 15 feet, and I looked up and the airplane's still there. And I'm just flying behind the airplane. Then I started to spin at the end of the static line, and I realized I had to get the spin under control. I'm going to lose consciousness. If I lose consciousness, I'm in a whole world of hurt because it's
Right.
in the airplane. It's the last run of the day. We're running low on gas. I'm putting a big drag on the aircraft. The pilots are panicking. They called Pope and they're talking about foaming the highway or foaming the runway. and landed me on the foam. In the meantime, I said, I don't know what's going on. I've gotten the spin under control. I kind of get into a modified frog. I pulled my knees up and my arms in, and I was able to stabilize right under the airplane. So I had that under control. Now it's all I had to wait until somebody figured out what to do with me. So one of the guys is still a friend. I've known him ever since. Gary Stansberry opened up the medical kit, and there's a bandage scissors. So they show they want to make sure I'm still conscious before
Right.
they cut me loose. So they're all sticking their head out watching me, you know. And he shows me to stand at the bandage scissors, and I give him an okay. I roll over on my back, and next thing I know, I feel myself falling free.
Okay.
I dump my reserve, and it goes out and opens up perfectly. And I land in the middle of nowhere. I mean, if they'd waited another 10 seconds, I would have been over a huge drop zone. That cut me loose
Yeah.
over the biggest goddamn forest that you can imagine. And they're all 50, 60-foot pines, you know. So I go in, I cover up my groin like they teach you in airborne, and I cover up my armpits and snake down through the tree, and without straddling anything. And I land, and actually I stopped about 10 yards off the ground, and I relaxed, and the shock waves went back up the static line, not the static line, but the suspension lines, and the top of the tree broke, and I felt myself falling, so I stiff-legged it from about 10 feet, or 10 yards, so about 30 feet. When I hit, I broke my third lumbar, and the top of the tree came down and put 6-stitch scar on the side of my face.
You're a mess. You able to walk out of there?
So yeah, they're coming after me, but I'm miles from, I'm out in the middle of North Carolina forest. So I had the wind knocked out of me, so I waited till I got my wind back. Lit up a cigarette, naturally. And I'm sitting there figuring, well, they'll find me sooner or later. There's no sense going to look
Right.
for them. So they have a general idea where I am. I walk over to the parachute, and the suspension lines from the main chute are right under the suspension lines. They're right under the emergency chute. So I pull the main chute away, and the emergency chute opens. So it probably was 1/8 of an inch on that
Yeah.
ripcord that would have brought down that whole plane.
Oh, man.
If that 1/8 of an inch,
Would have opened while you were dangling back there.
because we would have just taken
Right,
outside of
take
the
the tail
airplane.
right off the plane,
Yeah.
or whatever, but
Nobody knows how close they
So,
came.
yeah.
The pilots don't have a clue because they don't. They got parachutes, but they don't even have them on. They're tooling around, sitting on their parachutes. They're very close.
yeah, you start spinning the G's, you're not
Yeah.
gonna get out.
So that was my third jump. So I had a couple of guys, Danny Byard, who was I think D11 or 12 maybe. Ralph Palmer, who was D97. They kind of mentored me from that point on to get me back, to do it again instead of just forget it.
Did it shake you up a little where you were debating on whether to get back into it?
The thought crossed my mind that I would, I'm kind of a fatalist anyway. I know I'm not going to die an accidental death. I would have by now.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't that big a leap.
Okay.
Yeah, within 3 weeks, I think I was back out in the drop zone. But everybody wanted to know all about it. And about that same time, this one Scott, who was one of the guys who was most interested in what thought processes went on while I was hanging into the airplane, is the guy that didn't pull his ripcord and died.
yes,
The
that's
first
on
guy
there.
to die, and nobody ever figured out what happened there. But so I guess I made about 20 jumps, and then I went out of the drop zone one day, and somebody asked me what had happened to me lately, and I said nothing. That's just what I tell you when I got entangled. So there's a captain on the plane, Captain Penny, and we were doing a jump and pull because the cloud cover was really low that day. It was right about 2,000 feet, so we were just hop and pop. And I jumped, and then he jumped, and it turned out we were facing each other. And we had maybe 50 feet between us, and we were at the same altitude, basically. And I turned to the right to try to get out of his way because he was closing on me. And all I did was expose my open gore to him. So when he hit my parachute, he went right through my open gore. And all his cords and everything are through the open gore, and both of the parachutes are just chattering. You know, they're struggling to get air. So he panicked, and I yelled at him a couple times to relax, let go of everything, let me handle it. And I just reached up and grabbed 2 sets of risers and shook them. When I did, my chute collapsed, and we had just started attaching the sleeve to the main canopy. So until that time, your sleeve would blow off, and you'd have to go find it. So we attached it, and the sleeve would stay with the canopy after it opened, and we hadn't had any problems. And when his chute collapsed and he took off through my open gore, the sleeve did a half hitch on my lower lateral band. So it swung me around like this. It was him and his chute and my chute and me in that order. And we're making it for terra firma, but not a whole lot of hope of anything opening up. But at about maybe 500 feet, he got an opening, reopening, and I shot right by him, probably from here to Chris, 30 feet from him, shot right by him, and I got a reopening at about 100 feet. And by that time, I was really cooking because I'd been falling free for a while. I gather up my chute, walk over to him. He's still quite shook. Hands are shaking and he can hardly talk. He says, "God damn," he says, "McCarthy, that's the closest thing out here since the day that guy got towed under the airplane." I said, "Sir, that was me." He said, "Son, if I were you, I'd find a new sport." But we both continued to jump. I know that from my logbook also. In fact, I went on to make 300 jumps.
So how many jumps did you make total?
390. 390. That includes my static lines. I only have about 18 or 19 static lines because I was a paratrooper.
There was 5. Was it 5 basic to get your basic parachuting badge? Is that?
It's 5 to go on free fall.
Okay.
Minimum. And it requires that a jump master sign you off. So, or an instructor. So he's the guy that determines whether you've got presence of mind to pull a dummy ripcord, which is not connected to anything. And you need to be able to do that 5 times in a row.
That's basically the way I train.
Yeah. And the connection between jumping military and skydiving, really very little transference. Paratroopers, it's all by the numbers. Stand up, hook up, shuffle to the front, and go. And you don't have much control over it at all. In fact, you don't have any control over it. And if you have, and several times I've gone out of the plane and ended up on somebody else's canopy because
So
you're
close.
30 guys going out the same airplane.
And those rounds would just bump each other unless there was an open gore and they'd just bang into each other.
open gore, you get in a whole lot of trouble real fast.
But back then it was just straight rounds.
Yeah, 20, 35 feet, T10. They're still using basically the same chute. They call it a T7A now, or no, it's a T10A or something.
Yeah.
It's basically the same chute. I just saw it in one of my skydiving magazines. It's a little larger chute and it's more maneuverable because the T10, you couldn't do anything. You were just going to land wherever the trajectory took you.
Wherever the spot was and the wind was, that's
Yeah,
where you
yeah. And there wasn't much transference. You could be a skydiver, a paratrooper with 1,000 jumps. It's not going to help you be a skydiver. It might help you a little bit, and you don't have fear of height anymore, and you've got confidence in your equipment probably by that time.
But as far as flying your body and all that.
No, not going to help you at all. In fact, it runs counter to what you want to do. Because as soon as you go out skydiving, you want to stabilize your body. With paratrooping, you just want to fall dead weight, and the chute opens, and then you start worrying about where you're going to land. But I found for very little transference. The skill sets are so different.
So you got with the PCA? How'd you get it with the PCA?
Well, I was just starting. First, I went out for the skydiving, and that exposed me to the PCA. And I've always been kind of an organization guy. I like order. And there wasn't much.
Yeah, probably still isn't.
It wasn't a hell of a lot of order. And the PCA was struggling, but everybody knew we needed it. And the FAA was starting to take notice of skydiving, not only in places like Bragg, but everywhere, because it was sprouting up everywhere. And there basically was no governing body. And some guys back in New York, Mount Kisco, started up the original PCA, and they moved it out to Monterey. And when they moved to Monterey, it was about the time I joined.
Who were the original people in it? Do you remember?
Yeah, Russ Gumby, Stell, Lou Sanborn, Spatola. A lot of them are in that picture.
Mm-hmm. Was Otley part of it?
Otley was part of it, yeah. And so I think I joined while I was still in the Army. And then when I got out of the Army, I became an area safety officer for Colorado. And also was asked to work on the parachute safety rules, which had been formulated pretty well by 3 or 4 guys that I just mentioned. And they had a little booklet even published. And they asked about, I guess there were 20 of us, to take a look at it and make any suggestions that we felt were necessary to modify it and to cover anything that they had forgotten. And so I spent probably 10 hours working on it with my ideas and recommended changes, and everybody else did too. And, some guys didn't have any problems, had no input, and the other guys wrote a book, wrote a Bible. But they published a lot of my revisions, and so that got me into the 23 guys were all leaders from different areas in the States, so I got a chance to meet a lot of guys that were in the same situation as I was. And let's see, what was that?
How'd the PCA, how well did they do as far as keeping the FAA off the back? Keeping them from taking over skydiving or legislating how it was done?
Well, one thing about the FAA, is that they're not looking for work.
Okay.
They're not
But you
looking
take
for
the
work,
job from them, they'll be
especially in a field where they know nothing about it. Nothing about it. I mean, I went out and introduced myself to the chief of the FAA in Denver, and my uncle happened to be the governor of Colorado.
Oh.
So he listened
Got you
to me.
Had a little bit of in
That was
there.
my entree, so I could get to see him, you know. And I explained it, you know, what the sport was all about and how we go about it, and that we've got our own regulating body, and that we don't really need any more regulation from the FAA. I mean, we're not turning it down, but we just want you to know that we've considered all this. And he was more than happy to say, kiss me off and say, you know, good luck. And if there's anything I can do for you, let me know. Of course, we never called him again.
Right. That's what he was hoping for, probably.
Exactly. You know, they didn't know anything about sport, and they didn't really care as long as people don't start dropping.
Well, did they have a problem with, like, the California folks, or when there was starting to be some fatalities? Was there some urge for the FAA to take it over?
It's that kind of thing that causes them to want to take it over, yeah, or at least get involved. But, you know, it's like flying. They have a lot of fatalities in flying, too. It's, you know, anytime you leave the ground, chances are you're going to hurt yourself coming back down. I don't care what you're flying.
Could be
Or
your
it's
last.
a parachute or...
It's like a motorcycle. You got to remember, it might be your last
Or
time.
a Cessna 150.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, the FAA was more than happy to keep out of it, as long as we did everything we needed to do to make it safe, which is what we did. And it wasn't just, you know, in Colorado, it was all the little states around, scattered around. There was a lot of jumping. And it took a lot of guys who were interested in order, because there were a lot of guys that weren't interested in order in those days. You know, they wanted to jump, and they thought they could.
Didn't want anybody telling them how to do it.
No, they didn't want anybody to tell them anything. And so they were a problem, but gradually we won them over.
Competition probably had a lot to do with it. Didn't
I remember arguing with a guy whether or not he had to wear shoes when he jumped. He wanted to jump barefooted. And I said, well, you know, the regulation says you got to wear shoes. If you go barefooted, I'm going to violate you. He went barefooted, and I violated him, and they suspended his license for 6 months over a stupid thing like that, you know. Or there were guys that didn't want to wear helmets. You always get
push it.
one or two that, you know, are going to give you a tough time.
Well, the California guys, Jerry Bird and those guys, I guess, were pretty rebellious.
Yeah, they were.
The belly flyers, the original
Yeah, they were.
Freak Brothers and those
Yeah.
guys.
The guys I met were mostly the Elsinore group, and they were pretty orderly. And they were really a good bunch of jumpers, too. They know what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. And they welcomed people, you know. They weren't iconoclastic as a lot of these groups were. They kind of had a little group, you know, and they don't want anybody that they don't know.
Yeah.
But,
You still have that parachuting now.
yeah, I'm sure. You're always going to have it in any organization. What else do we have here?
What was it? It was
The USPA.
Yeah.
PCA became the United States Parachutists Association.
served as a sole spotter. Okay, so yeah, we talked about that. That's how you were the guy on the plane that told the style people where to get out at.
Yeah, they needed somebody to do that.
So what years were that? The 63?
62, I think.
62? And then that was in
Orange.
Orange. And then when did they have it in Oklahoma?
That was after my time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But my job was to basically spot all the guys who were involved in the style. The guys that were doing the accuracy landings spotted themselves. But I would just go from one airplane to another. We'd drop 5 guys or 7 guys, I don't remember, and we'd come down as fast as we could. And sometimes we'd even beat the parachutists to the ground.
Run to the next plane?
The guy would taxi up and I'd hop on and we'd take off again and do the same thing. And I'd do that all afternoon.
How many competitors do you think were in there first? 62.
A lot. More than 50.
Okay.
Yeah. More than 50.
Well, coming to the different, I saw you out at Fayetteville. What have you noticed the big changes since you first started jumping and what they're doing now? I imagine there's monumental changes, but what's the biggest thing you notice?
They don't pack parachutes anymore.
They pay people, is that what it is?
No, they just take it, throw it in a bag and fold it up and they're off.
Okay.
And the thing opens.
So
And
the old
then-
rounds took a lot more time to pack than these new squares. You had to be more
Well,
attention.
I kind of wonder, because I watch these guys, they just throw it together. They don't pay any attention at all. And they jump chutes that I would have never even thought of jumping, and they open. So the rounds, it was very orderly.